called Friday. To sponsor an iftar or sahur, we have a few spots remaining, and we need your help to fully sponsor them this year. Please check in at our office manager's table. Partial sponsorships are also welcome. This year, Zakatul Fitr is $20 per person. Zakatul Mal can be calculated on the Zakat page or using our Zakat calculator. TGB or Tarbiya Giving Back Ramadan feed is Saturday, March 23rd at 10 a.m. in Roseville. Come prepare hot meals for those in need. You can sponsor meals by scanning the QR code on the flyer and supporting the effort in this blessed month. Our Sunnah Club is available for childcare ages 3 to 9. Children must be potty trained. Our second youth qiyam is this Friday at Tarbiya House, El Grove. We begin at 11 p.m. The age range goes from 13 to 23 years old. Join us for a night of tahajjud, bonfires, trivia, individual ibadah time, and more. Our second Sisters Qiyam is this Saturday night at 11 p.m. in Natomas. Please bring finger food to share and sign up to volunteer for the night. Please see our office manager, Sister Farah, to sign up. Our second Brothers Qiyam will be held Friday starting at 11 p.m. in El Grove. Join us for a post-Tarawih basketball night featuring 3 full-sized courts. Showcase your skills, compete and connect. Join us for a brief khatra of Imam Aziz that will inspire us this Ramadan. Jazakumullahu khair, assalamu alaikum, and I'm going to give it to the brothers giving the khatra, inshallah.
Yeah, just leave it right there, it's fine. Side by side, yeah, I'll adjust it, inshallah. Make sure the chair's not going to break on me. Assalamu alaikum. First and foremost, I wanted to say a strong Ramadan Mubarak to each and every one of you. This is my first time actually being in Roseville this Ramadan. And this is, hey, you noticed, I hope, a good notice. You know, this is where it all began for me. And it's been a challenge just being away from the community that I love so much. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to have a special request from you all. I want you to keep my wife Sophia, my son Unais, my daughter Jamila, and my parents in your dua. Because had it not been for their sacrifice and their efforts, I wouldn't be here in front of you tonight. So please keep them in your dua. I also wanted to request that we make dua for our guest, the Hafiz Farhan Sheikh. He's been with me every night at Elk Grove. MashaAllah, he's a student at UC Davis. And he's been leading Tarawih for 10 years. And he drives all the way from Davis. So, remember him in your dua tonight when you're making sujood and ruku', inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. There's a famous hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, that we all have heard of at least once. And it's the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar, radiallahu anhu, and he was, sharing this particular story that Al-Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam shared with him. And so 3 men were traveling. And they came to an impasse where they required shelter. And so they found a little cave that they can go into for the night. And when they entered, a boulder fell and blocked the door. And subhanAllah, one of them said, nothing will save us unless we supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and beseech Him by virtue of our actions and our righteous deeds that we have done in order to get out of this situation. And so one of them said, I had parents that are old. And I used to offer them milk every single night before they went to sleep. And my preference was to give them milk before I gave milk to my own children and to, my servants. One of those days, and he's talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of those days, I was, taking the animals to graze a little bit further out from the norm, and we came back late. And when I came back late, my parents, they'd already gone to sleep. And I really, really disliked, not having them drink before my own children. So I waited. I waited beside their bed until sunrise, and my children were at my feet crying and begging me for the milk until they woke up and they drank that milk, and then I fed my children. And then after, he made this special dua. He said, "Oh Allah, if I did this effort to seek your pleasure, then deliver us from the distress caused by this particular rock." And then, subhanAllah, the rock moved slightly. Just a little bit. Not enough for them to get out, but it moved a little bit. So then the next man, he said, "Ya Allah, I used to have a cousin, and I loved this cousin dearly. Like, I really, really loved her, and I wanted to marry her. And I approached her one time, to be intimate with me outside of marriage, and she denied me. And subhanAllah, later, when there's a year of famine, she came to me for help. She came to me for help in that vulnerable state, and I gave her 120 dinars, but then shaitan whispered to me. Because I loved her so passionately, I wanted to take advantage of this particular moment. And so I made a proposition to her. And reluctantly, because of the circumstances, she agreed. But when it came down to it, she had made one last plea and said, to me out loud, "Ittaqi Allah, ولا تقسو الخاتم إلا بحق." Fear Allah. Do not break the seal unlawfully. As in, fear Allah, like, this is wrong. We have to be married in order for anything to happen. And it was that moment that I, woke up out of my, trance. And even though I loved her dearly and I wanted to be with her, Ya Allah, for your sake, I turned away from that moment. And I let her keep the money. And then he made a dua similar to the first man. And he said, "Oh Allah, if I did that to seek your pleasure, then remove the distress in which we are in." And the rock moved a little bit more. Still not enough for them to escape. And he said, the dua that he made was, again, "Oh Allah, if I did that to seek your pleasure, then remove that distress that we're in." The third man, he said that he had hired laborers one time to do some work on his property. And he paid every single one of them, except for one who left prior to receiving his payment. So what did he do? He took that money and he invested it for him in his own business. He invested it for him, and then years later, the man came to him and he said, "Ya Abdullah, Adi ilayya ajri. O slave of Allah, pay me my dues." He said, "Pay me my dues." And I said to him, "Kullu ma tara min ajrik." All that you see here is yours. What did he see? Min al-ibli wal-baqari wal-ghabani wal-raqiq. All that you see is yours. The camels, the cattle, the goats, the slaves, everything from this portion of that business. And the man said to him, Ya Abdullah, la tastahzi bih. Ya Allah, Ya Abdullah, don't, slave of Allah, do not mock me. You know, he thought he was making fun of him, right? He said, La astahziya bik. I'm not mocking you. I assure you, I'm not mocking you. So the man took all of his belongings and he walked away and he left nothing. And the man turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and said, Oh Allah, if I did so seeking your pleasure, then relieve us of our distresses. فانفرجت الصخرة فخرجوا يمشون. The rock slipped aside and they got out and they walked freely after that third, confession, if you will. Brothers and sisters, these are beautiful and subtle lessons in the hadith that ibn-ul-Jawzi illuminates for us. All of us need to put, one of the things we need to focus on is all of us need to always continuously put our best foot forward, right? But we need to do so like in a cautious manner. We have to be careful how we do that. It's not about, just mentioning these things, right? The three men obviously used their prior records of piety in order to appeal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. But notice how they did it. Notice the attitude that they had, the tone that they had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They didn't say, look how awesome we are, God. We're so pious and we're so great. Get us out of here. If that's what you got from the hadith, this is the incorrect, message. They weren't taking credit for their good deeds. Rather, the way we do with, unfortunately, like the way that we do with one another, we like to, what have you done for me? I've done this, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that. Why are you mentioning these things? Because you asked. No, we have this way as humans, we do this to one another in moments of argumentation, right? These brothers made tawassul to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by appealing to His blessings. The blessings that came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the first place. It was the hidayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that guided them to make those worthy decisions before. And it was His guidance that will get them out of their current trial. And this is the angle that they're taking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what Allah meant when He sternly admonished us in the Quran. يَمُنُّونَ عَلَيْكَ أَنْ أَسْلَمُوا. They regard their acceptance of Islam as a favor to you. قُلْ لَا تَمُنُّوا عَلَيَّ إِسْلَامَكُمْ. They tell them, do not regard your Islam as a favor from me, or a favor to me. بَلِ اللَّهُ يَمُنُّ عَلَيْكُمْ أَنْ هَدَاكُمْ لِلْإِيمَانِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Rather, it is Allah who has done you a favor by guiding you to the faith, if indeed you are faithful. It was Him that bestowed upon them the gift of aql in the first place. And they used that to ascertain the falsehood of idols and idol worshipping. They were able to distinguish that, like, okay, this is incorrect. Worshipping idols is wrong. We need to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they turned their ibadat to the true maker of things, Allah. That knowledge was the fruit of a mind that was gifted to them in the first place, brothers and sisters. How could they possibly then, after using that particular gift, ignore the giver of that gift? How often do we forget under difficult circumstances that it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, number one, allowed for those circumstances to happen to us, and number two, it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that can remove those circumstances from us. And we talked about, the timeline. We always rush Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and expect it to be now. You order DoorDash, you get your food right now. You go on Instagram, you hit a like, instant gratification right now. You need groceries, Instacart. You don't even have to get out of your car anymore. You drive up to Target, and they come and they put it in your trunk for you. And we treat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like that, as if like this dunya, gives us the right because of our experiences, that this is how it should be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is a dangerous mistake, brothers and sisters. And they think that, they did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a favor by worshiping Him, when it was through His guidance in the first place that they managed that feat. How could you think that the fruit is yours when the tree isn't? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the tree that constantly gives and bears fruits. It doesn't require water. It doesn't require sunlight. It doesn't require soil. He's constantly giving to the believers and to the non-believers. But alhamdulillah, we have iman, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with this hidayah and the wisdom to recognize Him in the first place. Allahu Akbar. This understanding, brothers and sisters, is extremely fundamental because it achieves two great spiritual states. Number one, gratitude. Gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who granted you the gift of hidayah and pretty much everything else that you have, including the ability to show gratitude in the first place. And we use that as a weapon against our own selves and our brothers and sisters, and unfortunately, under times of duress and the whispers of shaitan, against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, na'udhu billah. And number two, humility. Because upon knowing that the ability to see God in the first place in His creation and worship Him is a gift from Him in and of itself, and it makes you walk the earth with humbleness, brothers and sisters, or at least it should. And if we're not walking the earth with humbleness, there's something very, very wrong with our hearts and our minds. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection. And this humbleness allows for us to look with disdain at sinners. Not with disdain at them, but with empathy. If somebody sins, if somebody is struggling with something, if somebody is under the pressure of the world and their nafs and shaitan and they're losing, we as their brothers and sisters who have been ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Al-Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam should be the ones that help them and pull them out of their rut, not to, push them in the grave and start throwing dirt on them. How many people do we know that have been in this particular situation, where they come to the masjid broken, seeking the hidayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then somebody says something that deprecates them and breaks them down. Oh, your prayer wasn't accepted because your foot wasn't like this. Get out of here. Oh, your shorts aren't long enough. They come down to your shin, below your knee, but your prayer's not accepted. What are we doing? Under whose guidance and under whose instructions are we operating in such a manner? Perhaps this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant when He said in the Quran, كَذَلِكَ كُنْتُمْ مِنْ قَبْلُ فَمَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ فَتَبَيَّنُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرٌ. You were initially like them, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed you with Islam. So be sure, indeed, Allah is all aware of what you do. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us those who are grateful to Him for all of our blessings, the ones that we know of and the ones that we don't know of. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for humility, actual humility, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us and forgive our sins. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم وقوموا إلى صلاتكم ورحمكم الله.